Evening, everybody, and welcome to the RNL meeting tonight. We've got quite a long agenda, so we'll start with apologies for absence. And we've had apologies from Councillor Anketel, Councillor Coe and Councillor Leung. Before we go on to item 2, Mr. Johnson wants to say something before we carry on.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thank you to Councillor Yates and to... Sorry, I think there we go, I'm on now. Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to say thank you to Councillor Yates and to Councillor Salter for what I understand to have been many years as Chair and Vice Chair of this committee. So on behalf of the officers, I think we've had a great relationship and I thank you very much. And to you, Chair, a big welcome. And we're all looking forward to working with you going forward. And I think we've got some new councillors on the committee as well, so a welcome to them. And I thought it would be helpful to start with an introduction because we've got a few more officers here than we would usually. So if we start with Anthony.
Yep. For those who don't know me, I'm Anthony Thomas. I'm now the Director of Finance, Regulation and Enforcement. And despite the fact I've worked here a long time, I think this is the first time I've ever been to a regulatory and licensing meeting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. And I think most people know me, but James Johnson, Regulation and Enforcement Manager.
Tracy Caddy, Principal Licensing Officer.
Jack Toomey, Environmental Protection and Housing Manager.
Evening, Lorraine Chapman, Food and Health and Safety Manager.
Thank you very much. That is everybody around the table. So we now go on to item 2, which are the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest anybody wishes to say? No. Item 3, we're now on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Right, so I assume everybody's read them. So you agree that that is okay?
Yeah.
Is there anything anybody wishes to raise? I know there is an item on there that we're coming on to in a minute, which is something that Councillor Braga raised under the work programme. And in a minute, we're going to have a presentation because it links in about the private rental sector with the presentation of a housing standards enforcement, which Jack is going to do. Therefore, it's all linked to the King's Speech as well. So, Jack, are you okay about doing that? Oh, sorry, Councillor Henshaw.
Madam Chair, the time of finishing isn't on the minutes. Could that be included in future?
Yeah,
no. Thank you.
Thank you for telling us. So now we come on to item 4, which is the presentation of the housing standards enforcement.
Thank you, Chair. I've done this as a verbal update, but if any members want sort of a written summary, then by all means, just let me know and I can send that through to you. So first off, some data. Every year, approximately 6,000 people die from accidents at home, and a further 2.7 million require hospital treatment, and it costs the NHS almost £50 billion. The most common cause of these accidents is something we can easily tackle, and that is falls. Cold homes result in almost 5,000 deaths a year, and fires result in more than 300 deaths, both hazards we can tackle. Between 1 and 6 million homes are estimated to suffer from damp and mould. The respiratory effects of damp and mould can cause serious illness, and in the most severe cases, death. Housing enforcement sits within the environmental protection team under myself, and the legislation and powers we operate under apply to all tenures, including social housing, owner-occupied houses, but the vast majority are indeed private rented sector. Within environmental protection, our primary housing role is taking enforcement action, as you might imagine, against landlords and their agents where necessary. The last house condition survey for Lichfield District was undertaken quite a while ago now in 2017, But at the time of around 44,000 residential properties in the district, 5,500 were estimated to be privately rented. Of those which are privately rented, it was further estimated that around 15% had category 1 hazards, which is the most serious hazard in a home. Our work in addressing the problems is primarily reactive in nature, and we respond to complaints mostly from tenants. And over the last 3 years, we've dealt with around 650 cases relating to property conditions. The main legislative power we use is the Housing Act 2004, which requires an inspection to be done using what is known as the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, or HHSRS. Once an inspection is carried out, we might require works to be undertaken and can serve formal notices to ensure it takes place, or even prohibit the use of the dwelling if it's really that bad. If landlords still don't fix the problems, we can fine them via a civil penalty system or prosecute them at the magistrate's court, depending on the notice or order that we're talking about. Typical problems include things like damp and mold, excess cold caused by insufficient heating or insulation, electrical hazards, trip hazards, as I've already mentioned, fire hazards, such as lack of fire doors or smoke alarms. And there are others. In total, there's 29 possible hazards that we consider. And the hazards are risk rated, and that determines the category of the hazard. Category 1 hazards require action, whereas category 2 or lower are discretionary. Moving on, there is also houses in multiple occupation. They're properties where at least 3 tenants live, forming more than one household. They might share a toilet, bathroom, or kitchen facilities with other tenants. And it's a large HMO if there are at least 5 tenants forming more than one household and sharing facilities. The large HMOs we license, and we currently have 32 of those, but we estimate a total of about 120 HMOs, including the smaller ones. We also have regulatory powers in relation to caravan sites, both residential mobile home type sites and the holiday sites. As a result of that, we also act in relation to illegal traveller encampments where they exist on private land. Our approach currently is quite reactive in nature. It is possible to be more proactive and seek out problems such as illegal HMOs. Some councils introduce initiatives such as selective licensing schemes, which force landlords in a sort of specified geographical area to apply for a license to rent their property, and then we inspect the property up front to ensure it meets the standards before it can be given a license. And then there's also additional licensing, which is essentially getting those smaller HMOs and making sure they're licensed. These are useful tools in areas where you've got similar housing, such as sort of rows of terrace properties that are all in disrepair and quite often rented out. The issue with Lichfield is we tend to be a bit more sort of pepper potted in terms of our issues. You can't say there's a particular area that is, bad. More recently, we have from April secured funding for an 18-month contract for an officer to focus on damp and mold issues, looking at causes and possible remedies, as well as promoting the work of the team. And so far, she's inspected 33 properties alongside her training and identified 6 Category 1 hazards and 27 Category 2 hazards, with 3 improvement notices having been served and 1 prohibition order relating to a mobile home. We've worked with social services in relation to that, and it looks like the gentleman's going to be rehoused. She's also been looking at locations with known damp problems, such as Hob Roads flats, to consider what action can be done at scale to improve living conditions there. She's also delivering a project involving GPs, where patients present with respiratory diseases such as asthma, rhinitis, COPD, or bronchitis, and it is possibly linked to conditions at home. The GP is encouraged to refer them to us. Allergic conjunctivitis, eczema, fungal infections, anxiety, and depression can also be linked to damp and mold at home. She's also producing leaflets to leave in surgery waiting areas for the same purpose. It's hoped that this will help us discover the more severe cases of damp and mold, prevent ill health, and reduce the burden on the NHS. Overall, private sector housing enforcement is one of those areas which I think we could easily grow. Generally, only reacting to complaints potentially ignores quite a lot of tenants who might be reluctant to seek help with conditions in a rented property for fear of retaliation from a landlord. such as rent increases, harassment, or eviction. A more proactive approach would be to seek out things like unlicensed HMOs, which could bring in additional income from license fees. And whilst I would say housing problems in Lichfield district are clearly much less than places like, for example, Stoke, there are still significant problems for many tenants. Finally, just to cover some of the up and coming legislation, I can say that the Renters' Rights Bill will likely bring some changes to housing enforcement, extending the Awab's law, which is Awab Ishak, which some may remember, the young lad who died in a damp and mouldy home. Extending that to the private rented sector, meaning all landlords will have a time period in which they have to respond to tenants' concerns about hazards. It will extend the decent home standard to the private rented sector. No fault evictions will end, giving tenants the right to keep pets as well, and creating a national rented property portal, which could have good benefits to us in housing enforcement, allowing officers to view all the details about a property, see documents such as gas safety certificates, discover other properties connected to a landlord. Environmental health may also be responsible for taking action against landlords who do not register on the portal. There will be a fee, and the government is being lobbied by the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health and others to give that fee to the local authority to fund housing enforcement work. An estimated 4,000 rented properties and £50 resident registration fee would equate to £200,000 a year. And finally, I understand the government is just about to announce the rollout of a national vaccination program for respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. The annual campaign will start on the 1st of September 2024 and include pregnant women and those over 75. 30,000 under 5s and 9,000 over 75s are hospitalised each year with RSV, and around 20% of cases are directly linked to damp and mould in the home. So that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. Yeah. Any questions? Councillor Braga.
Thank you. That's very good. I would like a copy of some of the notes from it, please, if it's possible to send it. And I'm very pleased to have had that report. It sounds like, and from what I've seen, quite a bit of the stuff in the King's speech is similar to Michael Gove's ill-fated thing that was watered down and then eventually lost. So I think that's really positive. And obviously at some point in the work programme, when there's more details about that and when we've got a time scale, I would appreciate having an update, if you like, in terms of how the legislation is in practice going to change. But thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, Councillor Chaplin.
I can't reach that.
Just a quick one. You mentioned you dealt with about 600 complaints in 3 years, so 200 a year. How many rental properties are there within the district? Do we know?
Well, there's an estimate. I think I mentioned it about 5,500, but that was 20.
Anybody else with any questions? Councillor Ellis?
Yeah, thank you. How is it with the, don't say Bromfords, round by where I live in Burntwood, on Cedar Road? There's a lot of flats there that do have issues with damp. How is that going on with them? I know Bromfords have been looking into having a person sorting it out. Do we know how well they're getting on with it, and is it going the way you want it to go, or something along those lines?
Well, Bromford obviously have their own duties in relation to their tenants. It's not something it's on my radar. We do have a protocol with Bromford where they will generally deal with their own properties and tenants, and tenants will go back to them and complain, and only when they reach a certain point that they come to us. But generally speaking, our experience of Bromford is cases like that, they tend to be reasonable. How quickly they're going through it, I don't know, but some of these things are inherent building problems that can be difficult to deal with in the short term. So, but off the top of my head, I don't know this answer, but I can find out if you want. Okay.
Councillor Bragger, you wanted to come back?
So yes, could I follow up something that follows on from that? I mean, me and my fellow Stowe councillors have been dealing with issues around Stowe Street, which is the Bromford, and again, I think it is partly to do with the construction of the flats. We've had various promises and things from them, which doesn't seem to have solved the problem at the moment. Is there a point where the tenants or us can come to the council to put more pressure on Bromford, or is it something that we just have to keep working with Bromford on?
Absolutely, we have powers in relation to Bromford, as we do in owner occupied sector. So yes, there's a protocol, but the protocol is designed to make Bromford actually step up, if you like, before they come to us. When I first started at this council in 2017, we had quite a lot of work where we'd go out because Bromford were referring people onto environmental health. We'd do a survey and then tell Bromford what they needed to do. So you could argue, in effect, they were getting a free surveyor. Obviously, that wasn't sustainable. So we went with the protocol, and generally speaking, they do fix things before it comes to us, but still things will come to us occasionally.
I'd just like to add to what's been said that we have same kind of problems with Bromford in Paisley and Mile Oak. And the only thing that I can say is that their response has been shameful. And I think that it needs to be seriously looked at. You know, they've kept people waiting for weeks and weeks to get stuff done, which I could go in with separately with you later on, perhaps, rather than bring it up here. But it is shameful the way that they've been treated, a lot of the residents.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chair. So in fairness, I should say other housing associations are available. And on that point, do we have issues with the various other associations? I mean, Bromford has been mentioned so many times this evening, but they're not our only groups. Can you follow up on that?
We do, and we do have issues with them. I think the main problem with Bromford is they are our main provider of social housing in the district. So inevitably, if you've got a lot more houses, you're going to have more issues as a percentage of those. I think they do provide, the majority of it is good housing, but yes, they do have problems. But of course, having more houses, it appears that they have more problems than others. But yeah, we get issues with other housing providers.
I appreciate the fact that a lot of the problems that we've encountered are because of something you said earlier, which is to do with the build, that the way that they've been built, that it's on an asphalt base and water comes through, and you know it's not an issue. You know, it's not something that they can address particularly quickly, but they do leave people in those homes for a long period of time. And I do know quite a few people that I know are suffering quite badly health-wise as a result.
Obviously, this is a very important issue, and it has been highlighted recently with the new government. And I do think it's a thing that we need to keep on the agenda and bring it back when necessary, because all of us, I'm sure, get problems with, particularly with Bromford, as you said, it's the biggest housing association in the district. But over the years, there have been massive problems with damp and everything else, and nobody should have to live like that. And the health issues that accompany that are really terrible. So we do need to keep an eye on this issue. So everybody's happy with that? Therefore, we go on to the next item, which is the food safety delivery plan, which again is a very important issue within the district. Lorraine, are you going to do this one?
Thank you. So the Food Safety Service is responsible for delivering all of the authority's food safety service to just under 1,000 food businesses within the district. The service plan that's been submitted to you is 24 to 25, which supersedes the existing approved food safety service plan dated 21 to 24. It is essential that the delivery of the food safety enforcement is undertaken in an approved and consistent manner in compliance with government regulations. So the service delivery plan for food safety enforcement is a fundamental part of this process to ensure that national priorities and standards are addressed and delivered locally, taking account of local needs. So the activities in this plan are a statutory requirement. The authority is obliged to meet the requirements of the Food Law Code of Practice, which sets out how as an authority we should carry out food safety interventions and enforcement. It also includes carrying out effective and appropriate official controls and having sufficient numbers of suitably qualified and experienced staff. As part of its duties, the Food Standards Agency is responsible for monitoring and performing and reporting on the performance of food safety authorities. The Food Standards Agency do audit authorities, which we were audited recently in July 2023. Following which we have an action plan which has been agreed with the Food Standards Agency. This has been fully incorporated into the attached service plan. Failure to implement the action plan and to deliver the agreed points could result in subsequent action. So the Food Safety Service is experienced at delivering the requirements outlined in the Food Safety Plan and producing this plan. So I request that the plan is approved.
Any questions? Anybody? Councillor Checkland, then Councillor Bragger.
Okay, you just mentioned you were audited in 2023. What were the headline issues in relation to that audit, please, that have now been built into the plan? And the only other one I was going to ask a question on was a reference to page 41. The net expenditure of was £45,000 over budget. Now I know we've got the leave for finance here, so that's useful. So what led to that, and are we under control again?
So let me answer the first bit. Certainly that's probably where to start. So it was a routine audit. They randomly select local authorities for audit, and it was on service level provision and prioritisation. So you're given very little notice, and they review obviously where you are and what you're doing. One of the recommendations was previously, as you'll see, the service plan was dated for several years. So it was from 21 to 24. They've said to make that yearly, so we can obviously adapt that and flex as we need to make local needs. So to do it on a yearly basis, and also to include a lot more real data in the service plan, because if you notice in the action tables, there's a lot more data there on what we have achieved in the past year, and also estimation and forecasting of where we'll be at the end of this year. So that's essentially the main difference that was recommended to us, just to make it more of a workable document in terms of the numbers and on a yearly basis.
Councillor Bragger.
Thank you. Well, you've just answered my one question about why it is only 1 year. So that's the other question is about how soon do you expect if you like, the backlog, the wait for people to be re-inspected in the right time to come down to reasonable levels?
Yeah, so in the action plan, what we've agreed is that the higher risk category businesses are always dealt with first. And it is our intention and our targeted endpoint that we will achieve that by the end of September, start of October. That currently is on track, and we will be there for the A to D premises. So then for category E's, which is obviously the lower risk premises, that's an ongoing requirement that we will catch up with, which will extend realistically beyond 2025. And that is just essentially down to resource and prioritisation for risk.
On our staffing, we've got sufficient staff, haven't we, to actually do everything that's necessary? Because I did notice that, not connected with the food safety, but it's mentioned in the report about cosmetic treatments. So at some stage, people are going to have to be trained in those, because that's fairly new, isn't it? So I'm just wondering about your staffing and the turnover of staff as well.
Yes, so currently the resources required to deliver the plan are sufficient. Obviously, if there are further changes, such as the Health and Care Reform Bill, which, as you mentioned, is the special treatments, that does fall within our team as well. So that may be something that we'd need to revisit and just have a look to when the actual scheme has been decided upon, it's still being considered as to what the extent of that scheme is going to be. But at the moment, we have resources to do this service delivery plan and do the registrations of special treatments. But obviously, when that just changed to a license, we might just need to just revisit.
Thank you. Well, we've got recommendation there. Oh, sorry, James.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add to something that Lorraine's touched on there. She's probably done herself a disservice, but in the report, and when we have brought it to committee previously, we have re-established an EHO post in that team, and that's all down to Lorraine's hard work in evidencing the need for that extra post to go back into the team, and the sort of public health impacts that would have. And again, in the report that Lorraine's presented, there's mention of an apprentice environmental health officer who is supporting the team. That's a new post that we've established that will be working across all the teams and is helping chip away at those low risk inspections as well. But well done to Lorraine for getting that through.
Yes, thank you, Lorraine. It's a massive task, this is, and it's really important as well, particularly as we are in Lichfield and the district. We have a lot of visitors, so it's important that these things are addressed properly. So thank you very much for your report. Now we've got recommendation there to approve the delivery plan. So are you all in agreement with approving the delivery plan? Thank you. That's everybody. Thank you very much. Now we come on to the Dog Control Public Spaces Protection Order, which is referring to the fenced off areas of children's play areas. In case some of you wondered whether or not why other parts weren't included, but these are the specific ones that are just fenced off in children's areas. So Jack, you're going to do this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a bit of a history lesson. 1996, we had the Dogs Fouling of Land Act, which obviously just dealt with dog fouling and picking it up. Then in 2005, the Clean Neighbourhoods and Environment Act introduced dog control orders, which wasn't just for fouling, it was for things like preventing dogs being in a certain area, putting them on the leads, or putting them on leads when directed to do so, and that sort of thing. Then in 2014, the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act essentially made it possible to create a public space protection order, which could cover anything that was having a detrimental effect on people, which dog control orders were sort of absorbed into, if you like. The difference between dog control orders and public space protection orders, a big difference, is also the fact that dog control orders were sort of forever once you'd created them, whereas public space protection orders last up to 3 years. And we're here again. 3 years ago, we created a public space protection order to follow on from the previous dog control order that covered dog fouling primarily and a few other matters. This is more of the same, essentially. The only difference being it covers obviously dog fouling, excluding dogs from generally children's play areas, and we've added 3 of those in 3 additional village locations, which is Hopwas, Harleston, and Eddingale. And there's also, we've added a requirement for somebody to put a dog on a lead when directed to do so by an authorised officer, which the main reason being, we don't want a dog jumping up us whilst we're trying to deal with somebody about, say, a fouling issue. So we can direct them to put the dog on a lead. And then there is the continuation of the requirement for dog walkers to have with them an appropriate receptacle, normally obviously a dog bag. So a lot of it is a continuation. We've got 3 additional children's play areas, but also the requirement to put a dog on a lead when directed. The recommendation is obviously for a statutory consultation exercise to take place regarding those proposals. And the second recommendation is that if no significant objection emerges as a result of the consultation and no issues arise in consequence of legal checks, then the Regulation and Enforcement Manager has the authority to create a public space protection order in conjunction with the committee chair and vice chair. following the end of the consultation. If significant objection does occur, we'll return to this committee for a final decision on how to proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Again, a very important issue because fecal matter from dogs is dangerous as well for children. Not just the fact of the dogs being there, but the fact that if people don't actually pick up what the dogs have left, then that is not, it's antisocial anyway, but it's a dangerous issue. Councillor Ashton, you wish to speak?
I'm going to preempt Councillor Bragger on this one. It's something that we've discussed in the past. Long leads. If the dog can be kept properly under control, not just on a lead, but all too often, especially around, say, Stow Pool, you will find dogs on 3, 4, 5 meter long leads, which tend to run around people and try to trip them up. So it's not just a question of having the dog on lead, it's having the dog under control on a lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. The actual dog control order specifies, I think, a maximum of 2 meters length lead when directed to do so. Another thing to consider with these is we have to balance the rights of dog owners as much as the enforcement aspects. So it is possible to get quite draconian on these things, but of course then dog owners, can they throw a ball for their dog and exercise their dog? As with all these things, it's often the owner, not the dog, that's the problem. And a lot depends on how responsible they are in everything, from the picking up the fouling to do they put the dog on the lead if they see another dog approaching and that sort of thing. So it's reasonableness, really.
Anybody else wish to speak before we look at the recommendation of Councillor Bragger?
Yes, just a quick question. Over the last 3 years, how much enforcement has there been? How many times does it need to be taken to prosecution, for instance?
I believe we've had 1 prosecution of a gentleman who had 3 offences. You got to understand, especially for fouling, enforcement is really quite difficult because you've got to see the act, if you like, in person, and then see the person walk away. So yeah, I mean, it does happen. Obviously, you tend to find you'll catch the people who really don't care. There's obviously a lot of people, as we all know, who will pick up and then discard the bag, maybe hang it from a tree or whatever it may be. It is difficult. It's very difficult enforcement, very time consuming for very little results. I'll grant you that. But we do get success from time to time.
Councillor Shetland?
Just in relation to the enclosed play areas, you've got one on Stitchbrook Park. When it changes shape or has a leisure centre built on it, or is in a slightly different position, presumably you can move where your PSPO is.
Certainly, it will be reviewed. Yes, granted. Yeah, the other aspect to remember as well is that at any point we can review it, but also we can add to it. So we could create a second PSPO covering different issues that are dog related. There's nothing preventing that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chair. Just really a question on the dog wardens themselves. Where do we stand at the moment? We went through a period where I think we got any at one point, but they've sort of come and gone occasionally. Do we have many, and how frequently are they out at large and protecting us, as it were?
Well, generally we've got 2 casuals. They're both ex-police officers. They are around about 0.3 full-time equivalent, if you like. And obviously they've got a range of duties. Through COVID, they were taken off a lot of this sort of duty. So yeah, resources are difficult, but we try to target things. So for example, on fouling, we have intelligence cars, we call them, where it doesn't really apply so much for parks, but certainly where you've got fouling on streets, we'll deliver them to people on the street. And essentially it's a signposting postcard that says, if you see anybody not picking up, give us a description. Do they go into a property? Give us the address. What does the dog look like? That sort of thing. And then we can direct patrols at appropriate times to try and catch these people. One of the big issues, if you go into a park, you can be walking around the park. There might be 3 dog walkers. One of them might not pick up, but do you casually follow the right one? It's difficult. It is very difficult. But with a bit of intelligence, we can think, okay, we're going to be on that road at 7 a.m. when we know a person who we don't know. We're not specifically targeting them to that degree. We just know that somebody who has, say, a white terrier is often walking at 7 a.m. on a road to try and catch them. And it does work. You tend to find also winter is worse because longer nights and the cover of darkness helps, as well as some people who perhaps are not close enough to their dog to notice them doing the mess. So, all right.
Thank you. Anybody else? Right, you will look at the recommendations then, which are to agree a statutory consultation, and if there are no objections of any significance for a public spaces protection order is created. Are you all happy with that? Thank you. Right, we now go on to item 7, which is the taxi policy update. James.
Thanks, Chair. This is probably the biggest item in terms of length, 48 pages. The new proposed policy is, but the committee will be pleased to know it is half the length of the current one. What I propose to do is go through the recommendations first, and then only really focus on the main changes in the policy. You may have questions already, and that may draw out some more questions that between myself and Tracy, we hopefully will be able to answer. But in terms of the recommendations for this item, we're asking that the committee approves the draft policy to go out for consultation for a period of 6 weeks. And it's worth mentioning we have already consulted on our proposals with the taxi trade, and we've been able to put some of their thoughts, views, perspectives into the draft policy already. We're asking that the committee approve that the chair and myself can collectively make minor amendments to the policy following that consultation, that providing no significant amendments are proposed by officers following the consultation, that the committee recommend to Cabinet that they adopt the draft policy. And then finally, if there are significant amendments that officers propose after that consultation period, that the committee approve the changes to come back here so that you can obviously consider those amendments. I won't talk about taxis. We all know they're really important in many ways to the economy, to local people, to vulnerable people, to get people to hospital appointments, to connect people with retail, their jobs, all kinds of things. So as I said, I will just focus on the changes. It looks very different to the current policy, so that's the first change. And as I said, it's 50% shorter. We hope it reads much easier, and it's in plain English, and it should make more sense to anybody reading it. We propose to make changes to the application process. Currently, we get applications in for licenses, and many of the items that we need to go with it in order to progress that application are missing. So then it takes up a considerable amount of time amongst the team chasing those items. So we're proposing to only accept applications once all those additional documents are with it. And I'm talking about key things like DBS certificates. The second one is a change around out of area drivers. So we're proposing to require operators to tell somebody when making a booking if their vehicle or driver is is licensed by another council other than Lichfield. We will have to, time will tell what difference that will make. We're hoping it will encourage operators to put greater reliance on our own licensed drivers. So that's the lever we hope to apply there. The third one, and this is probably the biggest part of the change, is to do with the age of vehicles. So this is very much based on the feedback from drivers. Our current stance is probably that we're too prohibitive when compared to other councils, and that has probably seen drivers move away from being licensed by Lichfield to being licensed by other councils, one council in particular. So we call this a bit of a race to the bottom. every council is allowing older vehicles to be used. We've not gone probably to the extreme that the drivers would probably like us to, and we've looked at what other councils are doing, and we're sort of middle of the road if we go down this with this new policy. So you'll see in the reports a list of the sort of changes in terms of ages. So we propose to license older vehicles essentially, which we hope will encourage drivers to stay with us. So currently when their vehicle reaches a particular age, some of them are then moving to another council to continue to license it there. We're also hoping it may attract drivers back to us to license the vehicle from day one. We're making longer changes in terms of hybrid and electric vehicles. That's the lever that we've applied there to encourage greater use and reliance of those vehicles because of the benefits they obviously bring to the environment. We've done the same with wheelchair accessible vehicles. So we want to increase the number that we have. Currently we license 2 vehicles, and we hope by allowing those adapted vehicles to be licensed for longer will encourage greater use of them. Excuse me. And then finally, we've got some changes around enforcement. So currently we are probably over reliant on the subcommittee. So where we need decisions to be made around revocation or suspension, generally we would set up a subcommittee meeting to determine that decision. The problem we have is we can't do that at the side of the road. We can't call a subcommittee meeting and 3 councillors turn up to make a decision at the side of the road. And because of that, it creates more risk because there are times where we have to allow drivers to carry on or operators or vehicles while we're waiting for that hearing to take place. We currently have a penalty point system which sees licence holders tot up points. It's ineffective and it doesn't support robust and quick enforcement. So in the policy, councillors will see a proposed tariff of contraventions and what we've proposed the sanctions to be. So we're asking the committee essentially to endorse that tariff and give officers the ability at the roadside to apply one of those sanctions. Generally, it's a suspension, and it will enable the officer to make a decision on the spot, inform the driver, and essentially take the plates off the vehicle. And then the driver will come back 3 days later, 2 weeks later, whatever it may be, to come and pick the plates back up, and then they're on the road again. What we hope this will do is it will raise standards across the trade in Lichfield. We know there is a problem with standards. We had an example on the general election day where we were out doing election stuff, saw a taxi, and there were a number of errors with it. The sign on the roof wasn't connected to anything. There was damage to the vehicle. The side stickers had clearly been taken off for some reason and put back on and couldn't be read properly. The license plate wasn't attached to the vehicle. The driver wasn't wearing his badge. He wasn't wearing any shoes either. And unfortunately, the current situation means that we have to walk away and deal with it after the fact. So either call them in, call the vehicle in, call a subcommittee hearing, for example. So they're the main changes. As I said, we have done consultation already, and that's very much driven the changes around the age of vehicles, and we're really positive about that. We think that will make a real difference. After this, if the committee are content, we will undertake an online consultation that will be sent to the key stakeholders, all the licence holders, the police. It will be available online for local people and businesses to take part in. We do expect the trade to sort of feedback on that they would like even older vehicles licensed, and we will have to obviously take that into consideration. But unless there's any questions, and I'm sure there will be, that's the key changes that we propose in the policy.
Thank you, James. I think that we do have to recognise that our responsibility as a committee is for the safety of the public. So things that are being encouraged, we're encouraged to support, are really important. So I've got Councillor Salter, then Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a bit of clarification on the out of area drivers. Does it apply to either or both Hackney and private hire? It's a difficult one for us.
It'll be private hire drivers from a private hire base in Lichfield that have got a base elsewhere and they subcontract it out to them. So they're the one, their customers will be the ones that get that message.
So when it comes to Hackney, are other authorities' vehicles allowed to work in our area or not? Yeah, does that work? I can't pick up in our area. Yeah. Thank you.
Microphone.
Thank you, Chair. Is there any possibility of extending the age of EV and hybrid to say 12 years? I believe London is 15 for this class of vehicle.
In terms of, I'm just refreshing myself, but in terms of electric vehicles, I think we proposed that they are licensed in perpetuity, so forever. What we're able to do is require them to have inspections so that we can make sure the vehicle is safe. And for vehicles of that age, they would have an inspection every 6 months. And providing it passes, again, as a lever to encourage more electric and hybrid vehicles, we're content under this draft for them to hold a license.
2 more points. One is about enforcement, especially private hire being too close to taxi ranks, for example. Will there be an appeal process for a driver who feels he's been unjustly deprived of his license?
So generally, the enforcement we would do would mainly be suspensions, and the committee can see the proposed suspensions that we would apply for things that are not urgent, and particularly revocations. Then it would still go to the subcommittee. So we would still call a subcommittee meeting, and the councillors would decide whether the licence should be revoked or not. So circumstances where we would do that is where a driver, a vehicle, an operator has had several suspensions. It's clearly not working, and perhaps our only course of action is revocation, or where they've done something so serious that it requires coming to committee to make that decision. There is a right of appeal to that, and that's to the magistrates' court. So the decisions that are made can be appealed to the magistrates.
And lastly, this refers basically to point 363. It would be nice if organisations or groups such as the Purple Flag could be incorporated with this, so that there could be signs up in pubs, use a local taxi rather than I see someone nodding on over there. Yes. But so yeah, I mean, it's communication with the public. Please use a local driver wherever possible.
Yeah, we as you've heard, we have already planned to do that. We're also looking at how we promote our own licensed drivers and vehicles as well. So particularly the vehicles that are wheelchair accessible. We're looking at potentially essentially listing them on the council website, so people know the contact details in order to get hold of them.
Thank you. Seeing as we're talking about taxi licensing, I'm pleased to see we're taking a middle of the road approach. Couple of things in relation to the phasing out of the vehicles and the petrol vehicles. The 13.3 makes reference to solely petrol engines registered. Is that petrol and diesel engines registered? Because in the next section it mentions petrol and diesel licensed only. So I just wondered, I've no idea what EU4 is, but my assumption is it creates a lot of pollution. Page 111.
I think any reference to either only petrol or only diesel should be a reference to petrol and diesel. So that is likely.
It's just that one line says petrol and one says both. So that's why I wondered if In relation to the 12-year license for wheelchair carrying ones, if it's an EV hybrid vehicle, would that supersede the fact of the 12-year bit? Yes.
It would, yes. So that
Thank
would
you.
be licensed in perpetuity.
And just in relation to the fact that you're going to suspend people there and then, presumably you're following national guidelines, or we always have done in the past. Legally, can we do that? Or is there a national guideline that we've followed up until now that said that we couldn't do that and it had to go to committee?
So legally we can. The sort of division between what the committee or the subcommittee does and what officers do is really down to us. So there's no issues with us taking that action at the roadside.
Super. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Two questions. I'm sorry if I missed the answer to the first one in what you were saying. I fully support this idea of giving suspensions at the roadside. You know, that's the appropriate thing to do. But presumably those will then be reported back to this committee, will they? So you know, on a regular kind of basis, that this is the enforcement that we've taken at the roadside.
I think that's a great idea, and we could, if the chair wants, have it as a standing agenda item, and each committee meeting report back what action has been taken since the last one.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that we do need to be informed of all these things. If we're discussing them, we should know the outcome of what we're discussing.
And
Sorry.
Second thing, if I
Yeah,
can say,
sorry.
and I the answer to this might well be this isn't the right forum, but in terms of the issue between Uber drivers and Hackney carriage things, but presumably this policy and this committee don't have any say over where the taxi stands are. I mean, I have been having that discussion with other people, because presumably sorting that out could help to sort out those sort of issues between private hire, Uber and Hackney carriages. So is there anything that this committee can do, or shall I just keep trying to do that in another forum?
So it is absolutely a function of the district council to decide where Hackney carriage stands are. Currently, we're as in the licensing function is as a consultee of that. So in terms of the changes being made to the city centre, there's a project team that leads on that. They consult with us. We provide our feedback, and I would expect the committee is more than able, if the chair agrees, to provide their own feedback to that project team.
Yeah, anything that we can give feedback on, anything like this is important, I think, for this committee. Councillor Salter, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, thank you. Just the chart on page 64 showing the ages of the vehicles. It could be just the way I'm reading it. It seems a little bit backwards to me that existing hybrids can have a perpetuity license, whereas new ones only get 10 years.
That's new to licensing.
So new to
So it would
licensing.
be first come.
Right. It is the way I'm reading it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just seems.
It's
Probably the way you've written it.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to say anything before we look at the recommendations 3.1 to 3.4? No? So you're happy that we approve this draft policy? Right, thank you very much. And we now go on to item 8, which is the gambling policy.
Thanks, Chair. That's me again. The committee, we're very pleased to know this is probably going to be a very quick item. So we're essentially bringing this to committee because it's a 3-year policy. It is due for renewal, but we're anticipating a change in legislation to happen in the near future. Once that legislation comes in, we will then potentially have to incorporate changes into our policy. The Gambling Commission have suggested to local authorities that in the interim, to ensure that they have a policy that is extant, to effectively continue with their current policy but change the date. So this is a policy that was introduced 3 years ago. It went through consultation and came to the committee 3 years ago. All we are doing is changing the date. If the committee is content, this one will then go on to full council for them to agree that this policy continues for a further 3 years. We may stick with it for the 3 years, or as I said, we may have to come back at some point with changes as a result of new legislation.
Thank you. You will see that, as James has just said, that this has to go to full council for approval. So is there anything anybody wants to say on this? No, thank you very much. So we look at the recommendation then, 2-1.
Madam Chair, can I
Sorry.
refer to paragraph 3.6 on page 124? Moral or ethical objections to gambling are not valid reasons for the rejection of premises licence applications by the council as the licensing authority. Is that a statutory requirement?
It is council, yes.
Thank you.
Right, so with that then, are you agreed to the recommendation that's recommended to full council that they approve the renewal of the existing gambling policy statement for 3 years until January 2028? Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we come on to the work programme, and you will see that our next meeting is on the 30th of September. And so far, we haven't got much on the work programme. We've only got the polling places review, but I dare say that there will be things that may well crop up between now and then. James, have you got something to say on that?
Yes, Chair. Not my department, as you know, but as we've not had any footpath diversions this time, there could well be some next time. We've also proposing to bring a draft enforcement policy to committee. Currently, we're proposing to bring it in December. So we currently have an enforcement policy. We're going to revise that and then bring it in December. And potentially a report on street trading, pending advice from governance as to the route that should take. So they're the two things. We'd certainly like the enforcement policy added for December, and then we will let governance know what we want to do in terms of street trading. But as you say, Chair, there may well be things that come up before then, and in the future, obviously, we'll be bringing an update in terms of taxi enforcement each meeting as well.
Thank you. Unless anybody wants to raise anything they'd like to have put on the work programme, you will see, therefore, that you're not going to get away that lightly. Councillor Checkland?
Yes, thank you. Somewhere around this time last year, it was in this meeting or the September one, Jack, you mentioned an event management policy that was going to be put before Cabinet before Christmas. I haven't heard anything about it. Is it still happening? Is it because Crooked House, I believe, is happening again?
I'm slightly in the dark on that as well. It was originally going to be a noise policy, if you remember, and then it sort of expanded into a more event management policy. I'm not entirely sure where that's at right now, but we can certainly find out and get back to you. I've not been leading on it.
What I would say is since then, we now have an events manager, which is great because I don't think that we've had that role for a long time. So Louise Lewis is now the council's events manager. She's responsible for that overarching policy and supporting us holding successful or safe events in the district. So that would fall under her now. I can certainly find out and then we'll get back to you.
Anything else before Councillor Salter?
Yes, sorry to delay everybody going home. On events, it was supposed to come out around this time this year, but of course Martin's Law has been deferred for a little while. What will the implications be and the additional costs possibly to council in determining licensing and checks on events?
Great question. It was in the King's Speech, as you'll know. So we're still expecting it to become law. Whether there will be amendments to it is yet to be known. What we do know is certainly before the election, the government were proposing to set up a new regulator in order to regulate it. So it won't be us. Whether that will change, I don't know. There may not be an appetite to set up a new regulator just to do that. We already have, as a local authority, considerable remit in terms of events and venues, both in terms of licensing and the safety advisory group. So currently it's on track for a new regulator, but we will have to wait and see.
Right, before we conclude this meeting then, is there anything else anybody wants to raise? Councillor Checkland.
Sorry. Back in November last year, we had a committee that had a hearing that suspended a taxi driver and he went to court in March. Is there any outcome for that, please?
Is that the one that was due to go to Crown Court? So if I remember correctly, the individual and his representative left undertaking that they were going to appeal the revocation. They didn't. So as far as we're concerned, they're no longer a licensed taxi driver, and therefore we don't know the outcome of the court case yet.
Okay, so that therefore concludes tonight's meeting. 7:02, 2 minutes past 7, whatever. And thank you very much for your attendance, all of you, and to the officers as well for their presentations.
Yeah.